Fletcher, welcome to the show.
Jim, it's great to be here. I mean, I've been following your podcast for a long time, and the people you have had on, you've had incredible guests. So I'm just wondering why you've lowered your standards and you're having me on today. But hey, it's your decision.
Well, the listeners are about to find out why I'm having you on because this is going to be a pretty incredible episode. I'm super
Well,
excited to have you on.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
Likewise.
So,
So you have a long legacy. Your family has a long legacy in the Coast Guard. If the listener Googles your name, Fletcher Webster Brown, what are they going to find?
well, that's a good question. If they Google Fletcher Webster Brown, they're probably going to come up with my grandfather. And I'll go into that in a minute. They might come with my father. They might come with me because I'm the third. Let's go back a little bit to the beginning. First of all, let's talk about the Coast Guard. Okay, founded in 1870. George Washington signed the Tariff Act, and Congress then approved funds to build 10 cutters, the revenue cutters, and it was called the Revenue Cutter Service. And their original intent was to stop piracy and smuggling of goods and tariffs coming into the U.S. So that was the beginning. And then later in 1915, they joined together with the U.S. Life Saving Service to form what we call today the Coast Guard. And then subsequently, they joined with the Maritime Inspection Bureau and with the Lighthouse Service. So those four entities joined together. It's what we call the Coast Guard today. So my grandfather really goes back to before it was even called the Coast Guard. He was in what we now call the Coast Guard, I mean, a class of 1913. So it's back a ways. And in the morning, he told me those guys would row out to a sailing ship on the Thames River in Connecticut, and they would have classes and come back ashore at night. So my grandfather, by the way, if you Google him, he was in World War I. He served aboard the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Seneca. And if you want to Google him, you'll find some incredible stories about rescue efforts that my grandfather was central and core to.
So
And
World War
yeah.
One, the Coast
Mhm.
Guard was involved.
Absolutely. The Coast Guard has been involved in every war. It's one of their three missions, and I'll get to that a little bit later. But military readiness is a core component of the Coast Guard, and they have been involved in every war from World War One on up until the present time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So now let's go back to my great grandfather for a minute. He was a James Brown, not with the famous flames, the different one. And when he was 14 years old, he ran away from home, lied about his age, joined the Civil War, and he was out of Brockton, Massachusetts. He was a drummer boy in the Civil War, and he beat drums through nearly every one of the major battles you've heard. And his commanding officer was a guy named Fletcher Webster, relative of Daniel Webster. And my grandfather, out of total respect for his commanding officer, named his son, my grandfather, Fletcher Webster Brown. And then it was passed down. My dad, Fletcher Webster Jr., and I'm the third. So both my grandfather served an entire career in U.S. Coast Guard. My father served nearly 30 years in the U.S. Coast Guard as both a shipboard guy and an aviator. And then I spent 21 years in the Coast Guard. Interestingly, neither my grandfather or my father ever once said, "Hey, Fletch, why don't you think about going to the Coast Guard? You know, family legacy thing." No, never did it. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to be an engineer. So I went to college to be an engineer, decided I don't really want to be an engineer, thought, God, my dad, whatever he did, it seemed pretty good. I think I'm going to give that a try. So I joined the Coast Guard. I was fortunate enough to be able to be accepted to Navy Flight School. That's a year-long program, and after that, I was commissioned as a Coast Guard officer and a pilot. And 21 years later, I retired, never having regretted a single minute that I spent in the Coast Guard.
Wow.
Fabulous organization, fabulous career. Very fortunate. Yeah.
So your grandfather and your father were what were their roles in terms of like what were their jobs in the Coast Guard?
Yeah. So my grandfather, because they didn't have airplanes when he joined, he was on a ship. And he was a shipboard captain. He became a captain of a Coast Guard ship and toured mostly around the world, spent time in the Pacific, time in Alaska. But during World War One, he was a junior lieutenant on a Coast Guard cutter Seneca and was involved in some very heroic rescues.
Wow.
Interesting side story here. My grandfather's roommate at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy in 1913 was a guy named Elmer Stone. And Elmer Stone, everybody in Coast Guard Aviation knows Elmer. Oh, yeah, Elmer Stone. first Coast Guard aviator.
Hmm.
Elmer Stone was actually one of the first human beings to cross the Atlantic Ocean. So we've all heard of Charles Lindbergh, right? 1928, I think, he flew across the Atlantic. And most people say Lindbergh was the first to fly across the Atlantic. Not really so. In 1919, Elmer Stone, as a Coast Guard pilot, and five other Navy men flew on an aircraft called the NC-4, a biwing, held together with wires,
Wow.
canvas wings. The bow of it had an open hole, and up through the top of that would sit the navigation lookout with the goggles on. They flew from New York and they went up to Newfoundland and then the Azores and finally to Europe. But it was quite a long adventure for them.
Yeah.
So they were the first Coast Guard aviator, one of the pilots first to cross the Atlantic.
Wow.
So yeah, pretty interesting. So my dad joined the Coast Guard. He went to the Coast Guard Academy class of 1941, and my dad always wanted to be a Coast Guard pilot. That's all he ever wanted to do since he was a little boy. And so he took the national exam to be in the Coast Guard, and he placed number one in the country. Went to New London to join his class, failed the eye test. Oh boy, exophoria, the eyes point out a little bit. So they gave him a year eye exercises to do, strengthened his eyes. In the meantime, he got a scholarship to MIT, quit MIT, went back to the Coast Guard Academy, and spent a nearly 30-year career in the Coast Guard as an aviator.
Wow.
So I kind of followed in his footsteps, but I had never intended to do it. Yeah.
So you went into the Coast Guard and you got accepted into Naval Flight School. What was that like?
Yep. It was pretty intense. So the first, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks is just nothing but physical training, marching. I'll tell you a little side story that's kind of interesting. You check in, they give you a sheet of paper. Here's your instructions. Here's your locker. You read the instructions. Okay, you're allowed to have 6 t-shirts, 6 pairs of underwear. Fold the underwear 5 inches by 4 inches and the t-shirts 9 inches by 8 1/4 inches. Put them here in your locker. Okay. Here's another sheet of paper on how to set up your medicine cabinet. So you get all done with that. They come in to inspect. They go through with a measuring tape and they measure your underwear. Your underwear did not follow the spec. Okay. They tear your locker apart. You got to do it all over again. And you just lost your first Saturday liberty. Your medicine cabinet, you open your medicine cabinet going, the seam on your Brasso can was supposed to polish your belt buckle a certain direction. It wasn't pointing the right direction. It was 10 degrees off. We opened the can of the Brasso and the inside of the top was not cleaned. We opened your razor and took out the razor blade and it had some watermarks on it. You just lost again.
Hmm.
A lot of people say, that's just so ridiculous. Why do they harass people like that and whatnot? It's a lesson I learned that I've never forgotten.
Yeah.
They do it for a reason. Attention to detail. If you can't keep your medicine cabinet in order, how are you going to jump into a cockpit in the middle of the night, do a wipeout with no checklist, and put 100 switches in the proper position before you head out across the ocean? So it's a lesson. It takes people and teaches them detail is important. Pay attention to the details. So flight school after that, you go through a syllabus of flights. You start out in at that time, what's called a T-28 trainer. You do all your normal takeoff stuff. You go to classes during the day, meteorology, aerodynamics, mechanical systems, engine systems. You fly a syllabus of flights ending up with acrobatics and whatnot. Then you graduate to the next type of aircraft, which in my case was something called a T-28, a beast of an airplane. Giant R1820 engine in the front, little stubby airframe that was just a beast. But heck of an airplane, lots and lots of power. Once you get through that second phase, you then either go fixed wing or helicopter. And in the Coast Guard, you had your choice. Navy pilots, some had their choice, some did not. So I wanted to go helicopter because in the Coast Guard, with the rescue mission, that's where I thought the action was. So I went the helicopter route
Wow.
and spent about another 9 months flying helicopters, finally graduate. Interesting, when I graduated flight school, I didn't have enough hours to get my Navy flight wings. You need a total of 200 hours, and I hadn't had many downs where you had to repeat a flight. I did pretty good at that. So I was below the minimum amount of flight hours. What are we going to do? This guy sent me to an aircraft carrier. And I spent a couple of weeks on an aircraft carrier, Navy aircraft carrier, flying what they call plane guard mission. Really boring. Right-hand circles off the side of the ship for 4 hours in case somebody had an accident or went in the water.
Huh.
But after that, off to my first Coast Guard air station, San Juan, Puerto Rico. Spent time flying what's called an H-52 helicopter. Within a year, I have my designation as aircraft commander. And for the next 20 years, flying rescue missions primarily for the Coast Guard in both the H-52 helicopter and later a much larger helicopter called the H-3, both of which are amphibious. They're designed to be landed on the water. A platform can be extended, and you can pick people up out of the water onto the platform.
Wow.
So the only service that had amphibious aircraft, they're all gone now. The Coast Guard replacement helicopters are no longer amphibious. So that was an era gone by.
So how many rescue missions do you think you went on? Do you know the number, ballpark?
No, I don't know the number, but it's in the hundreds. I'm going to say 200 to 300.
And
Yeah.
how many of those do you feel like were going out in storm? I imagine sometimes you would go out and sometimes people would just get themselves into a mess and the weather was fine. And other times it was you were going out when everybody was coming in or people didn't even go out and you were going out.
Yeah, I don't have a breakdown on that, Jim, but a lot of it was bad weather flying because that's when people get in trouble.
Yeah.
Their sailboats don't capsize. A guy doesn't lose his balance and fall into a machine on a fishing boat. Uh, People don't get lost in a storm when it's bright, calm, and sunny out. So a lot of it is bad weather flying. So in the Coast Guard, you're taught bad weather flying, and they're the only service that teaches pilots. So let's say you do an engine failure. You're 10 miles offshore. It's at night. You've had an engine failure. Single engine helicopter. You're not going to fly home. So there's something called an auto rotation, whereas the helicopter drops, you use the velocity of the air coming up over the rotor system to keep it turning. And as you approach the ground, just at the right time, you have to raise the nose, which slows you down, pitch over, and pull the collective up to cushion the landing at the bottom. So the Coast Guard teaches their pilots to do that at night on instrument conditions without ever looking outside.
Wow.
And you're trained to do that, and I've done it many times. You
Can,
start with an instructor pilot, but you'll be flying. You have a hood on, so you can only see the instrument panel. And the instructor pilot will shut the engine, it doesn't actually shut it off, but he closes the throttle so there's no power. And you must immediately push the collective down. Go by the numbers. Everything's by the numbers. You know what airspeed you should be at, what altitude you should be at. And then at the bottom, I can remember 40 feet, you raise your nose, 20 feet, push over, pull the collective up, touch down in the water.
wow.
If
And
we get,
so,
if we get, if we get into that, that saved my life one time, but
yeah. So,
another story.
yeah. So let's talk about some of your more memorable rescues.
There's a number of them, and some of them are rewarding. I mean, really personally rewarding to you and your crew. There was one that was interesting. It picked up 23 people and 5 dogs off of a sinking vessel. That one was only memorable because of the number of people that were jammed into the back of the helicopter, but it was a safe mission. It was a rough sea, but it was a big ship and it was breaking up and it was in daylight. Not a problem for the pilots or the crew, but memorable in that regard. Probably
How many
from
people were supposed to be on that helicopter?
Normally on that helicopter, you have a crew of 4, and normally there's seats for 4 more. So
Oh,
we had people piled in the helicopter on top of each other. And I've got a great photograph that the whole crew and the people rescued standing outside the helicopter. But
for the
in
listener,
terms of,
we'll have that. We'll get a picture of that and put it in the action plan.
yeah,
So if you want
okay,
to see a
all right,
picture of that,
great,
we'll
yeah.
get that. So
Yeah, yeah. So as a matter of fact, the ops officer where I was still a fairly junior pilot then, and he called all the people together a couple of weeks later, and he said, "I've got something to report here." Fletcher and Rick Hawshaw was my co-pilot. They went out on a mission and they picked up 23 people and 5 dogs, and we did our research, and they've set a new record. The very most number of dogs ever saved in one rescue. Everybody, yeah. Okay, let's go into one that's a little more harrowing. Okay, this happened in Puerto Rico, probably around 1969, would be my guess. Horrible thunderstorms, deluge of rain. We got a call that there was 2 boys that had been riding their horses in a riverbed and a flash flood came down, washed the horses away. They were gone. The boys were going down the river and they grabbed onto a thicket of bamboo. So here's 2 young Puerto Rican boys, 9, 10 years old, hanging on for dear life on a thicket of bamboo in a raging river. Nobody can get to them. So we got called. A Navy helicopter had gone out ahead of time and couldn't get in. So they called us and a guy
Couldn't get
named
in because why? What do you mean?
the weather, and they had a much larger helicopter, and there may be a training issue in
Okay.
flying in really severe conditions.
Yeah.
So I will never forget this. I remember my crewman like it was yesterday. Scotty McDowell was a co-pilot, and a guy named John Luther, Petty Officer John Luther, was my crewman. That was a single engine helicopter, pilot and co-pilot, one crewman aft as the hoist operator. We got up on scene, raining like crazy. So you've driven a car, you look into the headlights and all you see is rain coming at you. You really can't see. Well, the helicopter had what's called a night sun, well, it had a headlight and then a light that would point down. But when you turned your light on, the rain just prevented you seeing anything. So I got on the radio. There was a sheriff or police officer helicopter that arrived on scene. It's dark now. It's pitch dark at night. The Navy helicopter is up there circling around. I got them on the radio, and I'll talk about teamwork later. And I could see when the sheriff's helicopter was flying along, he couldn't see anything either, but his light pointing down, I could see from behind him what he was illuminating. So I got the Navy helicopter to circle around up with the broad light on. The sheriff's helicopter, I said, I'm going to follow you. And I followed him and I could see what he was seeing down there. And I saw the boys on the bamboo. And I told him, hold your position, hold your position. So I made a circle around. He backed up. He kept them in when I came down and went in to land on the river, but it was too rough. So we held position on the river, but we couldn't get to the boys because of this big bamboo. So here's what happened. I get choked up sometimes thinking about this. John Luther, petty officer, says, I got it, boss. Has a life jacket on. We tie a line on him. He jumps in the water. The water is just raging. Logs coming down the river.
Hmm.
I move the helicopter and blowing him under the bamboo. Yeah, he grabbed one of the boys. Uh, the co-pilot got up, went back, pulled the rope, pulled John back to the helicopter, went back in the water again, got the second guy. Now we're in the water and we got to get back up again. So we went on the instruments
When you
and
say
I
you're
told,
in the water, the
yeah,
helicopter's not, right?
we're
You're
just,
above.
just touching the water. If we
Wow.
couldn't, you
Okay.
couldn't sit there, just
Okay.
touching the water.
Just
And
hovering
then
right
if
on the
a
surface.
log, Sky says log or something, you'd come out, a log would go by. And I said, okay, Scotty, you look outside. I'm going up on instruments. You go on the instruments, pull collective, fly up out of there. We took out some bamboo on the way up, flew back to San Diego.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah. Well, so as an aside to that, John Luther, who was an enlisted petty officer, he was a really sharp guy. He later was promoted to chief warrant officer. Then he went into a warrant officer to officer program. He retired at Coast Guard headquarters as a command.
Wow. Good for him.
Yeah.
He earned it.
Yeah. Awesome, awesome story.
It gives me chills
So,
listening to it.
we talk about teamwork, right? So we had a team in our helicopter. You don't get anything done without a team in this life. Okay. You got to have people you can rely on, people who back you up. You back up other people. That time we had a Navy helicopter providing top cover. We had a sheriff's helicopter. We had our helicopter. And we didn't need to have a 30-minute dialogue with each other to know what you need to do. A few words will do it, and
Yeah.
we
You
just
didn't know each other.
coordinate.
You didn't train together. These are three different departments, three different units coming
Yeah.
together
Yeah.
to and a common
Everybody's
cause.
got the exact same goal in mind. They understand what their position is on the team there, and everybody did it flawlessly. So that was probably my most memorable rescue.
That
Um,
is
lots
absolutely
of other lots of other ones.
fascinating.
Yeah, that was pretty awesome. Yeah,
You think about going out in those kinds of conditions. I mean, just what you described there is just bonkers. Like I couldn't even imagine being out in those conditions, let alone being the boys on the bamboo, being the helicopter pilot, like you were flying into that when nobody else would go into something like that, and then John Luther dropping down and to get those boys, and you're blowing him in with your wash to push
yeah,
them in. Like all of that is just beyond comprehension. And there was a time in I think 1972 when things didn't go as well as that one?
Yeah, I
How'd
had
it go?
actually two of those, and so I had two unscheduled water landings. The first one was we were out. We'd been out of Elizabeth City, North Carolina, and we've been flying three times that night. Big storms out there. I remember when we went up to Chesapeake Bay, and there were some duck hunters in trouble. There's another one I don't remember. We just gotten back to bed at like 2 in the morning, and the gong goes off, and it says a ship is breaking up offshore, 80 miles offshore. So we jump in a helicopter. This is a big helicopter now, twin engine, 20,000 pound H3 helicopter, twin GET 58 engines on it, a lot of power. So we flew out to on scene out there. We got to where the position was. And by the way, in those days, no GPS, no
Hmm.
Loran. You did it with a piece of paper, a map and a pencil line, and you would check your drift against land items to kind of calculate where you needed to go. So we got out on the scene. There's nothing out there. So we dropped a smoke in the water, started doing an expanding square search. One of the crewmen called out he could see a raft. We went there. Yep, there's a 20-man raft in the water. The vessel had sunk. It had broken up and sunk. So there are people in the raft. And as we pull up near the raft, we're off to the side making our plan on exactly what we're going to do to get these people. And generally, what you do in that case is you're going to drift the line across the raft. They're going to hold the line. And then you're going to move off to the side and lower the rescue basket and have the raft people pull the basket over, get in and pull the people up. So as we're discussing what we're going to do, the people in the raft, which I discovered later, they thought that we wanted them to jump in the water.
Hmm.
This is in North Atlantic and it was wintertime.
Wow.
So the 8 guys jumped in the water and now they're all in the water and we have no way to easily get them. So I said, rig the platform. So we would pull up and watch the waves come up and down and just bam, hit the water. Crewman would grab somebody, pull them in the helicopter, lift up again. Did that 8 times successfully. Got the eighth guy in, got him on the ICS. Everybody accounted for? Nope, one guy missing, the captain. Where's the captain? The last time we saw him, he was trying to get to the raft, and the raft was blowing away from him. So we went to the position where the raft was and started a search upwind from the raft. And there he was in the water. He was face down.
Hmm.
So he had probably passed away by that time. But there's a phenomenon called cold water drowning. I don't know if you've ever heard of that or not
No.
before. When somebody drowns in cold water, generally below 60 degrees or so, they can live for as long. There's been examples of 30 to 40 minutes, particularly with children who have been submerged in water and can be revived.
Wow.
Their whole system shuts down and they can be revived. So you don't give up. So we tried 3 or 4 times to get a platform pickup to pick the guy up. He couldn't help us because he was motionless. And I turned the helicopter, got on the water, and saw a big wave coming in. As I was pulling up out of the water, later people said it was a rogue wave. Yeah, it was a big wave. Whether it was rogue or not, I don't know. But it took out the tail rotor.
Wow.
So without a tail rotor in a helicopter, you don't fly. Maybe if at a really high altitude, you can drop it and you can get enough speed to where the wind might blow the tail around a little bit. So you can at least get back to the beach. So the only way out of that situation is either the helicopter is going to spin around until it goes out of control or you're going to shut the power off. So I let go of the controls. I shut both engines off. You have speed selectors here. The helicopter dropped in the water and now we're riding up and down and these waves in the water thinking it's going to turn over. Miraculously, it did not. Fishing boat got out on scene, put a raft on a rope, had the raft come in. The rotor blades are slamming the water. We got everybody off of the helicopter and back to the fishing boat. And we never saw the captain of the boat again, but the 8 people survived
Wow.
and we survived. Yeah. So
Crash
interesting. I
landed
stayed,
and still everybody survived.
yeah.
Wow.
Uh, I stayed out on scene for 4 or 5 days to salvage the helicopter. First time one had been salvaged from an open water situation without overturning. But again, let's talk about teamwork again.
Say that again. That was the first time.
That a helicopter, Coast Guard helicopter that had gone into the water in a bad situation had been recovered
Wow.
without flipping over. They're very, very top heavy. They want to be upside down
Hmm.
when they're flying too. They like to be upside down. So let me talk about this. After being on that helicopter for like a half hour of riding these waves up and down, not fear, worry, concern, stress. Are we going to get these people off of this thing okay? I'm not worried about myself. I've got a poopy suit on, cold weather suit. I know how to get out of an upside down helicopter at night. You train for that. They don't. So we got everybody off the helicopter first. When I finally got to the fishing boat, it was a big boat. I was so sick. I was hanging over the chart table and I was so sick I couldn't move. I was seasick. I was stress sick. And I heard all this noise and then I feel somebody shaking my shoulder. Fletcher, you okay? It's a guy named John Simmons, Coast Guard warrant officer. He and a guy named Randy Phillips came out, got lowered down to the boat, and stayed with me on that boat until we got the helicopter back to shore 4 days later.
Wow.
Fabulous, fabulous people.
Mm.
Yeah. So that was an interesting evolution there. The other unscheduled water landing is we'd been up to I don't know, Maine, somewhere up in Maine. There'd been a big storm up there, and we're coming back. We'd picked up some people. We got refueled in Brunswick Naval Air Station. We're coming back. We're flying by Boston. I remember we are above a cloud layer and below another cloud layer. So you can't see anything above you or anything below you. And you're on instruments because it's pitch dark at night and there's no horizon. And as we're flying along, the co-pilot, a guy named Jim Pennington, he's actually flying the aircraft. He's got the controls. He said, Fletcher, something's not right. I said, what? He said, I don't know. It's just something feels, and all of a sudden the helicopter just went nuts, pitching up 60 degrees, 90 degrees rolling. And I grabbed the controls. I got it and was fighting the controls while the helicopter's all over the sky, all over. And then it would just stop. Wow, everything stopped. And I can remember we're descending. We're like in maybe a 30-degree crab descending, coming down. And all of a sudden it took off and it went crazy again. So it would roll up and I would move the controls full the other way and it would eventually respond. Then it would flip around different ways. So that's when I went on the gauges and I yelled to Jim, see if there's a hole, tell me if you can see the water. And there was a hole in the lower layer. And he said, over here. By that time, we'd kind of stabilized. I touched the rudder to turn over there and it started all over again.
How long is
Went
this
on the
going on?
gauges.
Is this like 10 seconds or is this like 10 minutes?
Oh
Like
no,
how long is
this
this?
this this is a minute.
Okay. Okay.
Might as well have been 10 hours,
Yeah, sure.
you know,
Yeah.
because at that time you're sure you're not going to make it.
Yeah.
Okay. But you still, you know what happens is training, right? Training kicks in. Um, and so you do what you're supposed to do. Never seen this situation before. I go through the hole in the clouds, go right on the gauges, can't see anything. We're back in the clouds again. Can't see the water, can't see anything. Remember those auto rotations at night on instruments? That's the condition. The engines were still working. We still had power, but I was going into an auto rotation. And I can remember going through 200 feet, thinking I'm fast, trying to hold the nose up, going through different altitudes, helicopters rocking around, going through 40 feet, pushing the nose over, going a little bit fast, pull up on the collective, whap, hit the water. Pretty good hit. Next thing we know, we're back up in the air again. The collective still had power, hit the water and boom, back up in the air. The helicopter rolled probably 60 degrees. Okay. I pulled both engines off, pushed left, and we hit the water again. Very exciting. Half ramp came down. There's water floating in and out of the helicopter. Just incredible. So, and I can remember us all sitting there just looking at each other going, I won't say what we actually said. Holy crow. Without the crow part.
Yeah.
Jeez. And I remember Jim Penn said, Fletcher, I'm going to send you a Christmas card every year for the rest of the
Yeah.
crew's back there. Yeah, we spent a couple hours out there, flat calm water at that time.
So you sat
In a
out there.
boat.
So you
Yeah,
land it. You're safe. You're
we're
alive.
sitting there. Yeah, there's water coming in and out of the helicopter, but it's floating. And a Coast Guard 40-footer out of Plymouth, Massachusetts, came out, put a line on us, and towed us back to shore.
And you just stayed. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Did you stay in the helicopter when you got towed back, or you jumped in a boat?
No, after we got the helicopter, righted, you put
Okay.
flotation gear out on it and
Gotcha.
whatnot, and got towed back in.
Okay.
But here's something interesting that I don't remember. So the next day, I go into the base, and they're like, "How are you going to be?" Oh, I'm ready to go flying again. It's like get back on the horse.
Yeah.
And they said, how did you do all the radios? I had no idea what they're talking about. So I found out later that while we are descending, I got a mayday out. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Helicopter 1482, approximate position, where we are. I got a mayday out on UHF radio. I shifted to VHF radio, went over to the HF, which is a different control panel over here, and got out a mayday on two HF frequencies. I don't remember any of it.
Wow. You're just responding in the moment.
Responding in the moment. So they say pilots make, just like anybody else, bad decisions, original decisions in critical situations. That's what training and repetition is all about.
Yeah.
And when you're not on a mission, you're training. You're training your whole life. There's muscle memory. There's the same type of thing going on with flying. You go through a simulator. You simulate emergencies. You've seen it over and over, and you just react. You know what to do. So that's the value of training that kicks in there.
And
So
I know some of the training that you've done was in the what's it called? The Dunker? The something
oh yeah, the Dilbert
Gilbert
Dunker.
Dunker? Yeah.
Yeah. So that and when I went through flight school originally, that was 1960, late 66, 67, through Navy Flight School in Pensacola, Florida. Fabulous training. What an organization. At that time, they had something called the Dilbert Dunker, and they taught you how to get out of a cockpit of an airplane should you go in the water and turn over. So you went down to the pool and you put on all your gear, and then you got in this cockpit, and it was on a railing, and it went down into the pool, and when it hit, it was on a hinge, and it would just flip upside down, and you'd unstrap, and you'd pull the canopy back, and you'd get out and come up and get out of the pool. So it wasn't that difficult, but you're a little anxious about it the first time you do it. You have to do it, half a dozen times. Later, they changed that. They upgraded the whole system. They now have for helicopter guys an entire H-60 helicopter fuselage, cabin, pilot's compartment, seats. You get in that and you go through that thing. I don't know how many times. I'm going to say 6 or 8 times. Every time is more difficult. That whole thing is on some kind of rig where it comes out over the water and it drops in the water and it may start to roll this way and then it may flip over the other way and start to sink. They can control that.
Yeah.
And now you have to get out. And they teach you how to get out. And once you learn how to get out, it's not as bad as you might think. There's certain techniques that you use. Never lose a reference point. Be calm. Know exactly what you're doing before you ever take your seatbelt off and you let go of anything. Exit the helicopter. Then they do it with all the lights off. So now it's night, it's pitch dark. You're going in, you're rolling, you don't know whether you're right side up or upside down, you get out of the helicopter. For the pilots, you go out of the helicopter by releasing the side windows and going out the window. Piece of cake after you've done it a couple of times. Okay, so we're going to do it again. Okay, wait a minute. The window's jammed because one of the divers is down there and they've locked the window shut. So now you've got to change plan and you've got to reverse and go out through the rear of the helicopter. Again, all for good reason, for training, for safety. Once you're in that situation, you react. You don't think about, geez, what am I going to do? You know what to do because you've done it before.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the value of the training.
So fascinating stories. I could keep prodding you for more and more stories.
Mm.
What can the listener take away from this? The listener who, they're, success for the athletic minded man. They're athletic minded men. They're competitive. They want to succeed in life. They want to succeed in everything they do. They're goal oriented. I mean, what can they take away from this? What can they learn to implement in their own lives?
Before I answer that, let me hit that. I've laid out over 21 years some pretty exciting times. Every day is not exciting.
Yeah.
Okay. As somebody say, there's hours and hours of boredom punctuated by moments of stark terror. Most of it is you're on training missions, you're flying, you're doing logistics at the lighthouses, you're doing some rescue missions. Occasionally you get one that's pretty hairy. But lessons learned is a pretty broad question. What lessons did you learn over a period of 21 years? And then I had another career. What lessons did you learn over your life? And I think that the lessons learned probably apply to pretty much everything. So here's what I think. I don't care whether you're talking about your life or a business plan or your family or a vacation. The first thing you got to have is you got to have a goal. And if you don't have a goal, where are you headed? You're a ship without a rudder. So have a goal, have many goals. And once you got a goal, you got to have a plan to get there. And if you got a plan, you got to measure your progress on the plan, or how do you know when you've arrived? Along this plan, you're going to be thinking about what are some of the critical factors that could steer me off course on this plan. And we've all heard the old cliche that no plan survives initial contact with the enemy. The enemy is time, it's weather, it's events in your life, it's all kinds of different things. But you need to measure your plan, your progress on the plan. You need to look ahead and see what critical factors may impact you on this plan. And some of the factors may be critical and end your plan, or some of them maybe things just pop up that, okay, you kind of steer around. You know, you go into a 4th of July picnic and you run out of gas in your car. Okay, what happens? The hamburgers are gone and the coleslaw is gone when you get there. Okay. You don't plan well and you run out of gas in your helicopter while you're trying to get back to the beach. And, you end up in the water with an upside down helicopter and your crew paddling around in a raft. So some things are critical, some things are less critical.
Yeah.
Really pay attention to the critical ones. And I think that we learn these lessons over and over and over and over again. Hopefully we learn the lessons. And after every mission in the Coast Guard, you're going to have a debrief.
Hmm.
What did we do right? What did we do wrong? What could we have improved on? The real key to success is, because you're going to have failures and lessons on anything you attempt to do, did you learn from those lessons? And in the future, did you apply the solutions that you figured out would help that situation?
The listener, like if you've been listening to the podcast for any amount of time, you know the productive pause, this concept that I've identified that is just the single thread that is in common with nearly all of my world class performers who have been guests on the show. The definition is it's a short period of focused reflection around specific questions that leads to clarity of action and peace of mind. And this is what Fletcher's talking about right now is the pause, the after action review, the debrief, right? And you can do this daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, after a sales presentation, after a vacation with your family, like what went well, what did not go well, what can I learn and do differently next time? If you do that, then you do better next time. You grow, you learn, you get better.
Amen. That's exactly what I'm saying. Applies to anything.
Yeah.
I don't care what your job is, what your goals are in life. So here's the cherry on top. You have a career goal. Mine was to be a pilot in the Coast Guard. You work hard at it. You train and you train and you train some more. And you learn by your failures and you apply the lessons you've learned and you do it better next time and you keep doing that. And then the dark night comes and the team comes together. It's you and the other guys that have done the same thing. And it's the guys in the Navy helicopter. And it's the guys in the sheriff's helicopter who are all doing the same thing. And now you're a team and you've pulled together and it's the team that makes that whole thing work. So those two kids, I don't even know what their names are. The two Puerto Rican boys that we pulled out of the bamboo. I don't know their names, doesn't even matter. The cherry on top is when that all comes together, if what you did resulted in saving somebody's life or even significantly improving their life, you got all the reward you're ever going to need. First responders, firemen, police, EMTs, doctors, nurses. That's a whole category of people who are somehow mentally driven to help other people, not for their own benefit, but you get benefit out of it by seeing the results of all your training and your work and your teamwork. So there you go. Semper Paratus, Coast Guard motto. Be prepared, always ready.
And for the listener, if you're not in one of those professions, like how are you impacting the world? Like at the end of the day, are you making a difference? I read something recently, like you'll spend more time on your own block, more time in your own block wherever you live than anywhere else in the world. And you can start right there, right? With your neighbor, helping
Amen.
your neighbor out,
Yep.
your own family, etc. So Fletcher, thank you so much for making time to come on the show. The one thing that we didn't share
Yeah.
with
Oh, what's
the
that?
guests is I told them there was a surprise that I was going to reveal at the end. And for the listener, I have heard these stories several times. I could listen. I was sitting here on the edge of my seat getting chills listening to them again. Fletcher is my father-in-law. So I'm so grateful that you're my father-in-law. So grateful to get to hear your stories and learn your lessons, and so grateful that I got to have you on the show.
Yeah, well, Jim, that goes both ways. This a guy, I could not have a better son-in-law. My daughter and my grandchildren are blessed to have you as a provider and a role model in their lives. So, yeah. So, hey,
Grateful.
go look at your neighbor and see what you can do to help him.
That's right. All right, Fletcher,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, Jim, enjoyed it.